Chile, the long road to reconciliation. In the interview, Chilean Senator Isabel Allende Bussi.
Isabel Allende, on the 40th anniversary of the putsch, what is the significance of this date for Chileans?
I think society is moved, which isn't surprising with a big anniversary like this one 40 years later. Today, citizens are more aware of their power. They're more demanding. We're also right in the middle of campaigning for the presidential elections.
You were with your father on the 11th of September in the La Moneda presidential palace. What did Salvador Allende say about that day?
He was very worried about the civilian population, especially his own advisors, the people in his circle who stayed with him out of solidarity, a few ex-ministers, journalists, people connected to him professionally, and finally my sister Beatriz and me. He was particularly worried about the women, and he didn't want us to stay in the presidential palace. There had already been tank attacks, and we'd been warned that the palace might be bombed. He wanted to avoid civilian casualties at all costs. So on the one hand, you could see Allende, the capable leader, who could give a speech expressing his concern for what was happening. And at the same time, there was Allende the man, who was worried about the women, especially his daughters. My sister Beatriz was 7 months pregnant. Of course, we didn't want to go. That would have been a betrayal. We wanted to remain with him, but in the end we did as we were told and left the palace. It was painful but unavoidable.
What was that farewell with your father like?
It was silent. We were in the cellar because, as I'd said, we'd been under attack from tanks and gunfire when he came to see us. He told us earlier that we had to leave, so the world would know about this treachery. As witnesses, we were invaluable. We were supposed to make public everything that had happened. He talked at length, but finally he went up with us, and at the final moment he silently embraced us. I've often said I wasn't aware at the time. Maybe I couldn't even grasp the fact that it was perhaps the last time he would hug me. Somewhere deep down, I was probably hoping there'd be a solution, or at least I refused to believe it was the last time. In any case, it was clear to us that my father had said the only way they would remove him from the Moneda Palace would be as a dead man, because he was conscious of his dignity as president.
Before the Moneda was bombed, President Allende said words to the effect of, "The great avenues will open again, where free men will walk to build a better society." Is this the case in Chile today? Do you have the impression that there is democracy?
There is democracy, but with limitations. So I would say we are only partially a democracy. Chile is a democratic country, but the imposed constitution is still valid. We have an absurd electoral system, with qualified majority voting that prevents necessary reforms. The constitution isn't representative. It's aligned with private sector privileges, rather than the role of a state that guarantees the common good. Only in 2005 did we succeed in preventing military commanders and former military commanders from holding office in the Senate. It was a laborious process, a laborious transition. We're a limited democracy, and we would like to change that. What you see in the streets is a demand for far-reaching reforms. We need to take a different approach, take to the streets, and continue to protest. On the other hand, Parliament and the parties are becoming less and less credible, which is not good for a society that lacks justice and equality to the extent that ours does. So there is something of a movement for social and economic equality and against the abuse of power. The people sense this incredible abuse, and they feel that they're at the mercy of big business and capital. While ordinary people are rigorously taxed, the privileged elite can get away with a lot.
It's hard to avoid the impression that a right-wing government would be out of the question, since its politics go against this majority demanding reforms. But on the other hand, a government with Michelle Bachelet will be very difficult, since the need for reforms is so great and the possibility of implementing them is so limited.
That's right. I think the people are giving Michelle Bachelet a chance because they trust and believe in her. But we need to be cautious and not stir up too many expectations. We can't say in 4 years' time everything will be different when we have an electoral system that prevents us from gaining a majority to push through reforms. We have to say to people, it's not enough to tell the president we want real reform. We need representatives on our side who can take on these challenges.
At the moment, there are calls for reconciliation. A senator from the right believes there's a need to patch things up and even apologized. How do you interpret this?
That isn't a collective action, least of all from his party, the UDI, which is rooted in Pinochetism. The presidential candidate, Evelyn Matei, said she was 20 years old at the time, so she doesn't have to apologize. Of course, in the following 20 years, she would have had plenty of time and the necessary maturity to understand what was going on around her. Instead, she defended Pinochet and attacked Spain and England when Pinochet was arrested. There are many contradictions here. One section of society doesn't want to accept responsibility. The path to finding the truth and getting justice is long, and it could be more extensive. I don't believe in reconciliation at this point, absolutely not. I think we have to first establish a basis for shared values. For example, that we never want to see democracy destroyed again, that we will never call on the military to step in, and that we will never allow such an extreme polarization of society.
What do you think Chileans have learned from Salvador Allende's life and his sacrifice?
It's strange that the only image the students protesting on the streets are carrying is that of Salvador Allende. Even the generation too young to remember him appreciate that he represented a national project the majority of people supported, and that he was committed to justice and equal opportunity. I think his message still resonates. We live in a country with a growing economy, which has reduced poverty, where there are plenty of positive indicators, but in which inequality is still dominant. His message is most relevant where there is the greatest social injustice. I think young people value consistency and coherence in politics. Salvador Allende maintained the same discourse for 50 years, and that's something people value. For him, ethics and politics went hand in hand. That's something in doubt today, and that's why I think people value consistency.
Your father was the legally elected president. He was always a politician who championed free and fair elections. But there are people who see him as a dictator. Is that a tactic to distort your father's image? Or did he really have the intention to one day hold all the power in order to make Chile a revolutionary country, as the right maintains?
Let me be clear. My father always stressed that you have to arrive at socialism through democracy, plurality, and freedom. In Chile, you had institutions, the parliament, the political parties, freedom of the press. And don't forget, the media outlets that were close to the regime were in the minority. The rest was in private hands, and he had no issue with that. His economic strategy included a public, a mixed, and a private sector. He never intended any kind of dictatorship of the proletariat, with either a single party or a different model. His opponents just used that claim as an excuse. My father never would have accepted that for Chile, because he was fully aware that we had a long democratic tradition. He never considered ordered the one-party system because that would go against our traditions. He always said he wanted a system that tasted like empanadas and red wine. That means one that was in line with our culture, our tradition, and our socio-political history.
If we recall President Allende's address on the day the Modena Palace was bombed, what sort of future do you dream of for Chile? What do you wish for your country 40 years on? And what would Allende want for the Chile of today?
I wish the great avenues would open up and be an expression of freedom, social equality, and a rejection of injustice, discrimination, and exclusion. I would love to see society operate differently. I'm afraid we still have a long way to go before we achieve our goals. And I don't just mean in a political sense, but in the sense of freedom and integration. All citizens should be able to see themselves as part of a project and a country.
As a Chilean politician, you have spread a message of hope, and there is a warmth to you even when you talk about people who have done you harm. How is it that you manage to convey your message with so much strength and gentleness, despite the suffering you've experienced in your own life?
I don't know if you can call it gentleness. I've learned that respect is important. I can have opponents, but they don't have to be my enemies. I think we made a grave mistake in the past of allowing our opponents to become our foes. This is one of the most important lessons we've learned. That takes great generosity.
You're right there, Isabel Allende. Thank you for your time.
I thank you.